The call came on a Tuesday morning, 11 days before Thanksgiving. I was in the kitchen when my phone rang, my hands still damp from washing the breakfast dishes. I saw my daughter's name on the screen and felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one I'd been feeling for the past 2 years whenever she called. Not excitement, not warmth, something closer to bracing yourself before stepping into cold water. I answered anyway, because that's what mothers do. She didn't say hello. She never said hello anymore. "I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving," she said, and her voice had that particular flatness that told me the conversation had already been decided before she dialed. "We've been talking, and we think it would be better if you didn't come this year." I stood very still. Outside the window, the oak tree in my backyard had gone completely gold. Leaves were letting go one at a time, drifting down without any drama, as if falling was the most natural thing in the world. "I see," I said. "It's not personal, Mom. It's just, how things have been. And his parents are coming. His whole family. It's going to be a full house, and honestly, after last Christmas, we just think it's better for everyone if we keep it smaller." Last Christmas. She said it like an accusation. Last Christmas, I had quietly declined to sign a document. My son-in-law slid across the dinner table between the main course and dessert, a document transferring my late husband's land into their joint names. I had smiled and said I'd have my own attorney look at it first. That was apparently the unforgivable thing I had done at Christmas. "I understand," I said. "You're not upset?" I didn't say that. She exhaled that sharp, impatient sound she'd perfected somewhere in her 30s. "Mom, you need to stop being so sensitive. Everything is always about your feelings." I thought about my husband then. I thought about the last real conversation we'd had 3 years ago in this same kitchen, when he was still strong enough to sit at the table, but we both knew he wouldn't be for much longer. He had looked at me with those clear gray eyes and said, "Dorothy, I need you to promise me something. Don't let them have the land. Not until you're ready. Not on their timeline. On yours." I had promised. I was still keeping that promise. "You have a lovely Thanksgiving," I said to my daughter. "Give the grandchildren my love." I hung up before she could respond. I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching leaves fall. People who haven't experienced it assume that being shut out by your own child is a sudden thing, a dramatic confrontation. Slam doors. Final words. That's not how it happens. At least, that wasn't how it happened with us. It was gradual. A slow withdrawal. Like a tide going out so gently you don't notice until you're standing ankle-deep in mud where there used to be ocean. It started when my husband got sick. My daughter had always been close to her father. I understood that. He was an easy man to love, patient and steady, and full of quiet humor. She had his eyes and his stubbornness, and somewhere underneath the adult she'd become, his fundamental decency. I had always believed that. I kept believing it longer than I probably should have. When the diagnosis came, she swooped in. That's the only word for it. She arrived at the house with her husband and her organizing energy. And within a week, she had rearranged my kitchen, set up a medication schedule I hadn't asked for, and begun referring to the house as the property in conversations I wasn't entirely meant to hear. I told myself it was grief. People handle fear in different ways. She was terrified of losing her father, and this was how she managed it, by controlling whatever she could control. I gave her every benefit of every doubt I had. My husband was less generous. In his final months, he watched his daughter with those gray eyes. And one evening, after she'd left, he turned to me and said, very quietly, "She's not here for me, Dorothy. She's here for the land." I told him he was wrong. He was tired and ill, and reading things into normal behavior. He looked at me with tremendous patience and said, "I hope so." He wasn't wrong. The land had been in his family for 4 generations. 63 acres in a county that was changing fast. The kind of change that turned old farmland into something developers watched with hungry eyes. My husband had grown up running those fields. His grandfather had planted the windbreak of elms along the east edge. There was a pond that froze solid every January, a barn that hadn't been used for cattle in 30 years, but still stood straight because his father had built things to last. He had never wanted to sell it. Not once, through all the years when money was tight, when our daughter was in college, when the roof needed replacing and the medical bills started arriving. Other people would have sold. He never even considered it. He left it to me, not to her, to me, with a handwritten note attached to the will that said simply, "Use your good judgment, Dorothy. You always had more of it than you gave yourself credit for." My son-in-law noticed the will before the reception was over. I saw it happen the way his expression shifted when the attorney read the relevant section aloud. Something flattened behind his eyes, and then reorganized itself into a smile that had nothing behind it. 3 weeks after the funeral, he came to me with the first document. Over the next 18 months, they tried 6 different approaches. First, it was a family trust. Wouldn't it make more sense, from an estate planning perspective, to consolidate assets? Then it was a development partnership. They had contacts. They could manage the process. I wouldn't have to worry about anything. Then it was concern for my well-being. What if something happened to me? Wouldn't it be better to have it all settled now? Cleanly? When none of those worked, they switched tactics. My daughter started calling less. When she did call, she was distracted, slightly impatient. As if talking to me was an obligation she was scheduling between more important things. Family dinners became briefer. My grandchildren, who were 7 and 9 and still at the age where they ran to hug me when I arrived, began to seem almost coached, not cold exactly, but careful, as if someone had been having conversations with them that I wasn't supposed to know about. I noticed all of it. I said nothing, but I also wasn't doing nothing. My husband had a cousin, a woman named Helen, who had spent her career in conservation law. We had always stayed in touch, Christmas cards and occasional calls. The comfortable, low-maintenance friendship of people who genuinely like each other but live different lives. After my husband died, she called to offer condolences and we talked for almost 2 hours. It was Helen who first suggested what might be possible. The land wasn't just acreage anymore. The county had changed. 3 major conservation organizations had been quietly acquiring land in that corridor for the better part of a decade, protecting green space against the sprawl coming up from the south. The pond, the elms, the contours of those 63 acres, all of it sat in a position that made certain people very interested. Helen knew those people. I asked her to make some calls. I didn't tell my daughter. I didn't tell anyone. I went to meetings quietly, drove myself to offices in towns 40 minutes away, sat across tables from men and women in good suits who spoke carefully and asked intelligent questions. I had spent 35 years as a landscape architect. I understood land. I understood what it was worth. Not just financially, but in terms of what it meant and what it could become. Those conversations felt more natural to me than any conversation I'd had in the previous year. It took 14 months. There were delays and revised proposals, and one negotiation I was convinced had fallen apart entirely, which sent me to bed at 8 o'clock one Wednesday night feeling very old and very tired. But Helen kept going, and I kept going. And eventually the terms came together in a way that honored what my husband had loved about those acres. And also, as Helen put it, with characteristic understatement, provided you with considerable security for the rest of your life. Considerable security. That was one way to describe it. I signed the final agreement on a Thursday morning in October, in a conference room that smelled of coffee and fresh paint. I wore the blue cardigan my husband had given me for my 60th birthday. When the attorney pushed the papers across the table, I thought about that handwritten note. You always had more of it than you gave yourself credit for. I signed my name. My hand was steady. After that, I went home and made myself a proper dinner for the first time in weeks. I thought about calling my daughter. I turned the phone over in my hand and sat with the question for a long time. But I thought about my son-in-law's face at the reading of the will. I thought about the document he'd slid across the Christmas dinner table. I thought about my daughter's voice when she told me I wouldn't be welcome for Thanksgiving flat and final. As if the decision were obvious. As if I were a scheduling conflict rather than her mother. I set the phone down. I would tell her eventually. but it would be on my timeline. My husband had been right about that too. Thanksgiving morning. I woke before 6. That's age for you. The body stops believing in sleeping past dawn somewhere around 60. And after that, you might as well make peace with the early light. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the yard. The oak had finished dropping its leaves. The garden I'd put in last spring was skeletal now. The way gardens get in November. All bare stems and structure. I'd always found that beautiful, the bones of a thing. What it looked like when the decoration fell away. I wasn't sad, exactly. Or rather, I was sad the way you're sad about weather. Not angry at it. Not surprised by it. Just aware of it. Moving through it carefully. I called my friend Ruth, who was spending the holiday with her sister in Phoenix. And we talked for 45 minutes about nothing important and everything that mattered. I made a small Thanksgiving meal. Just for myself, turkey breast and roasted sweet potatoes and cranberry sauce from the recipe my mother had made every year. The one that called for orange zest and a splash of bourbon. I set a proper place at the table. I used the good china. I was doing the dishes when my phone rang. It was past 9 in the evening. I'd been half asleep on the couch with a book. I saw my daughter's name and thought, for a disoriented moment, that she was calling to wish me a late, happy Thanksgiving. Maybe the day had softened her. Maybe she'd thought of me. I answered. She was crying before she got a word out. Not quiet tears, the heaving, gulping kind. The kind that means something has broken open and there's no managing it. I hadn't heard her cry like that since she was a child. Mom, she said. I'm here, I said. I need to. Mom, is it true? He showed me something on his phone? His brother texted him. It was in the news, the county paper, and then Mom, it's everywhere. I sat up slowly. What did you see? I asked. The land. Dad's land. It says, you. It says, a local woman. They're saying 63 acres. Sold to the Whitmore Conservation Foundation and a residential trust. And the mom, they're saying it was worth. She couldn't finish the sentence. Is that true? Did you do that? When did you do that? I looked out the window at the dark yard, the bare oak, the distant stars. Yes, I said. A long silence. Why didn't you tell us? I considered the question honestly. Because it wasn't a decision that required your input, I said. It was your father's land, and he left it to me, and I handled it the way he would have wanted. But we could have if we'd known. We could have. Done what? I asked, not unkindly. She didn't answer that. In the background, I could hear my son-in-law's voice. Low and urgent, asking her something. She moved away from him, or perhaps into another room. The ambient sound changed. Mom, I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I'm sorry about Christmas. I'm sorry about, we've been so. She stopped. I don't know how we got here. I did know, but I didn't say it. I love you, I said instead. That hasn't changed. But some things have changed. And I think we need some time to talk about them honestly. Not tonight. When you're ready, and when it can be a real conversation. Are you angry at me? I thought about it. Anger had been part of it, yes, but sitting there in my quiet house, with the good china draining on the rack and the smell of cranberry sauce still in the kitchen, I mostly just felt tired of performing emotions for other people's comfort. I'm tired, I said. I'm tired of being managed. I'm tired of being handled. I'm 63 years old and I ran a business for 30 years and I raised you. And somewhere along the way, you started treating me like a problem to be solved instead of a person. She was quiet for a long time. I know, she said finally. Very small, very young sounding. I know I did. Okay, I said. That's a start. We didn't talk for much longer after that. There wasn't anything else to say that night that would have been useful. I told her to get some sleep. I told her to hug the grandchildren for me. I told her I hoped the rest of her Thanksgiving had been good, and I meant it. When I hung up, I sat in the silence for a while. I thought about my husband, the way I did every day, in small flashes, a particular gesture, the sound of his laugh, the specific weight of his presence in rooms where he no longer stood. I thought about what he would have said about this night. He would have been unsurprised by all of it. He would have made tea and sat across from me and said something quiet and dry that somehow landed exactly right. I made the tea myself. I sat at the kitchen table where we had sat together 10,000 times. Outside, the November sky was thick with stars. In the weeks that followed, my phone was busy in ways it hadn't been in 2 years. Helen called to congratulate me again and make sure everything had processed cleanly. My attorney called with paperwork. A journalist from a regional magazine called I Didn't Call Back. Several people I'd worked with years ago, in my landscape architecture days, reached out with warm notes. It seemed the news had traveled in circles I'd forgotten I belonged to. My son-in-law called once. I let it go to voicemail. His message was smooth and practiced. The voice of a man recalibrating a strategy. Warm where he had been cold. Humble where he had been dismissive, full of references to family and legacy, and how much they both missed me. He didn't mention the documents. He didn't mention Christmas. He said they would love to see me soon. I listened to the message twice and then deleted it without responding. There were things I was willing to repair and things I wasn't. I was willing to sit across from my daughter in an honest conversation, the kind we hadn't had in years. I was willing to put effort into knowing my grandchildren, being present in their growing up. Being the grandmother I'd always planned to be. I was willing to love my daughter through the fact that she had behaved badly and would probably, being human, behave badly again in other ways at other times. I was not willing to pretend that my son-in-law's sudden warmth had anything to do with me, and I was not willing to go back to being managed. My daughter came to see me the second Saturday of December. She came alone, without calling ahead, a small, significant gesture, like arriving without armor. I saw her car pull into the driveway and stood at the kitchen window and watched her sit there for a full 2 minutes before she got out. She looked tired, older, somehow, than the last time I'd really looked at her. I opened the door before she reached the porch. She stood on the bottom step and looked up at me and said, "I don't know where to start." "Come in," I said. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table, and she wrapped both hands around her mug the way she'd done since she was a teenager, and for a while neither of us said anything. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car went slowly down the street. She started in the middle, which was the right place to start. She told me about the conversations she and her husband had been having, separately from her. In the months after my husband died, she told me about the logic they'd constructed, how they'd told each other it was practical, sensible, just smart planning, how they'd told each other I would be overwhelmed managing the land alone, and they were doing me a favor. She told me how she had talked herself into believing something because the alternative that she was helping her husband take something from her own mother was too uncomfortable to sit with. She said, "I kept waiting for you to be angry. When you weren't, it was somehow worse. Like you could see exactly what I was doing and you were just watching." "I was," I said. "That's terrifying." "I know. Mom, I'm so sorry." She looked directly at me when she said it, not away, not at her coffee, not at the table at me. "I'm sorry for Christmas. I'm sorry for Thanksgiving. I'm sorry for the 2 years before that when I was treating you like an inconvenience. I'm sorry for all of it." She was crying quietly, the manageable kind now. Nothing like the phone call on Thanksgiving night. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "Your father was a smarter man than either of us gave him credit for sometimes," I said. She laughed a little, watery. "He really was. He told me to use my good judgment." I looked at our hands, hers and mine, the same shape of knuckles, the same way of holding a coffee mug. I think I finally did. We talked for 3 hours. Not about money, not directly, not in that transactional way her husband always brought to conversations. We talked about her father. We talked about who she'd been as a child, the funny particular details that only a mother remembers, how she'd insisted on wearing her rain boots every single day for an entire year when she was 5, how she'd cried reading Charlotte's Web and then gone back and read it again immediately because she said she needed to understand it better. We talked about my grandchildren and what they were like now. At 8 and 10. And how fast it goes. I told her. You think you have forever. And then suddenly they're grown. We talked about what we wanted things to look like between us going forward. She asked carefully what I planned to do. I told her some of it. The conservation easement that would keep the land intact in perpetuity. The trust Helen had helped me set up. My plans to travel Scotland, specifically, because my husband had always wanted to go and we'd always found a reason to wait. And I was finished waiting for things. I mentioned, without dwelling on it, that I had enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Without asking anyone for anything, she nodded and didn't ask the specific numbers. That restraint cost her something. I could tell, but she paid it. Maybe she was learning. When she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time. The way she hadn't since she was in college. I held on. She smelled like the same shampoo she'd used for 20 years. Lavender and something clean. And I thought about how strange it is that you can love someone through disappointment, through anger, through the specific sadness of watching someone you raised become someone you don't recognize. And still, when they hug you, find that love completely intact. Annoying, almost, but completely intact. Are we going to be okay? She asked, muffled against my shoulder. We're going to work at it, I said. That's better than okay. She drove away in the early December afternoon, the light already going golden and low. I stood on the porch until the car turned the corner. Then I went inside and sat down with my coffee and thought about Scotland. I thought about those 63 acres, the pond freezing solid in January, the old elms my husband's grandfather had planted in a row along the east edge. They were still there. They would be there long after both of us. That was the thing about land, the thing my husband had understood his whole life and tried to tell me in 100 different ways. Some things you don't own. You just hold them for a while. You try to hold them well. I thought about my name on that final document, my hand steady, the blue cardigan, the coffee smell. I thought about how long I had been waiting for someone to acknowledge that I was capable, that I was more than a problem to be managed, a property to be organized, a mother to be tolerated. I stopped waiting for that a while ago. I picked up the phone and called Helen to ask about flights to Edinburgh in April. She answered on the second ring, laughing before I even told her why I was calling, as if she already knew. Maybe she did. Some people see you clearly from the beginning. You learn, eventually, to keep those people close and let the others catch up in their own time or not. You learn to stop explaining yourself to rooms that weren't listening. You learn that your worth was never up for anyone else to determine in the first place. You learn it late. Sometimes, that's all right. It counts just the same.